How's your water?
What do you mean, how's my water?
Well, you keep sipping it, so is it good water or is it bad water?
I mean, it's only the finest filtered water.
We should change the British filter.
That's a good point.
Anywho.
Anyway.
Oh.
Okay, that was
I wasn't ready. Okay.
Much more realistic. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to episode 3 of Al-Andalus at the intersection of music and myth. I know, it's so good every time. I am still your host, Moriah, and joined once again by Cat Mom, Meme Master, and Freeze Baby, Moriah Jensen.
I have no choice in being here.
Don't tell them that.
Help me. I'm just kidding. Mostly.
Mm-hmm. We'll dive right in right away today. So just to recap a little bit what we talked about last time, we were talking about life in Al-Andalus, right? Yep. About how it's a blend of people, of language, and of culture, and about some of the specific intersections of Christian and Islamic art and culture. We were talking about the architecture, showed you those pictures, pretty pictures, which you described to our listeners. Talked about some literature and poetry, and we ended our last episode talking about the Moriah and Zejal, which are two original genres of poetry in Al-Andalus.
Yeah, and it was a cliffhanger.
I know, it was a cliffhanger because I said...
It's on the edge of my seat ever since.
They're song genres too. Mind blown. I know. That was the cliffhanger. We're gonna pull you back from the cliffhanger and
give
you a little more context. So we're gonna talk about the Moriah and Zejal and how they influenced the course of Western music history. So the first mention of the Moriah dates from the 10th century, 900s.
Yes.
I know.
Correct.
Math is hard. And there's right, and there's speculation that the Zejal is even older. So these are really old styles of poetry and music.
Why haven't we heard about them?
Good question. Good question. I hadn't heard about them either. And a little bit more in depth. So the poetry and song styles typically feature romantic themes, like that which you read in the poetry yesterday.
Yes.
I know you were a little uncomfortable. I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that.
That's okay.
And they're also in strophic form, which means, it's kind of like if you're thinking about something today, like pop songs, where they have a verse where the words change up, but it's the same music behind the background. Right.
In church.
Right. Yeah. And it varies in, rhyme structure exactly, but basically the Moriah and Zejal are characterized by the strophic form and also the use of refrains, which are like...
For the people who don't know what strophic means, can you explain that a little bit further?
Right, so that's like where the music stays the same and the words just change up. So like you were saying with the hymns,
sure. Mm-hmm.
And with, popular songs today where in the verses the words change up, but the music generally stays the same. And then the refrains are kind of like a verse in popular music today. You can think about it that way, where there's the same music and words that keep coming back over and over again in between the different verses.
Oh, so you mean like it's the chorus?
Right, yes, gotcha. The chorus.
Yep, I understand. I'm tracking with you.
The chorus. So it's strophic form, you have the stanza, and the refrain is just like a verse and a chorus.
Gotcha.
And so... this had a huge impact on the troubadour song in France, which I hinted at last time. So, for some context, the troubadours were like traveling minstrels who would play music from town to town in southern France, which, if you think about the map, southern France is pretty darn close to the Iberian Peninsula.
Yes.
Right.
I'm going to take your word for it because I'm directionally challenged, but yes, I concur. Yes. I can pull up a map for you later if you want to see.
Yeah. So it's pretty darn close there, and they would actually also come into the Iberian Peninsula sometimes, and maybe parts of Italy as well. They traveled around a lot.
Right.
And there are a lot of similarities from their songs to the Moriah and the Zejal. So they also used romantic themes and the strophic form with refrains, which weren't found in other European musical traditions of the time,
Mhm.
indicating, and especially because the troubadours kind of became popular in the 11th century, which is after these types of poetry that we were talking about in Al-Andalus.
Mhm.
So it pretty much indicates pretty clearly that there was some influence of the Moshe and the Zedjel on this troubadour music. And I was trying to research where the first mention of refrain comes from in Western music history, and it's with the troubadours.
Oh.
Except if we use this context that we now know that they took the influence from this other music,
Yeah.
the concept of a refrain as we know it today actually originated much older from Al-Andalus.
Huh.
And it's interesting to think that we don't hear about that. I mean, we learned in our class about Western music history about the troubadours.
Yeah.
We didn't learn about who influenced them.
Right. It was just like, ta-da! They popped out of the ground and started
singing.
Right.
Like, what are they?
Gentlemen, hurrah.
Trolls? I don't
Right.
know.
So, and that goes back to the whole aspect of history isn't straightforward. You know, we only get part of the story, and the victors get to tell that story of how they just came up with this. You know, this idea of the refrain in these types of songs.
I did everything myself.
Right, but we're uncovering the mystery here.
Architects.
I know.
No, not architects. What's the word?
Archaeologists. I'm
Yep.
directionally challenged, vocabulary challenged.
I'm challenged and I'm too.
So do you want to hear a musical example?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I would like to preface for the listeners that although Moriah has provided a wonderful microphone, I would be playing it off of my computer speakers. So it's
because you can't. We shouldn't pirate YouTube videos for the sake of audio clips.
Right. But I'll put a link in the description so you can go and listen to this yourself and have a higher quality of life while experiencing this. But you'll get the general idea. So first I'm going to play for you a Moshe.
Okay.
And then I'm going to compare it to a song of the troubadours, of one actually who's attributed to be the first troubadour.
Oh.
So yeah, let's give her a listen. So here's the Moshe.
I'm so ready.
Okay, so that gives you a little taste.
Yeah.
Sound tech, do I need to turn my volume down?
A little bit.
Okay.
That's okay though.
All right, and then now I'll play the troubadour song example.
En Albert nie parlemo così, menanni ai sozzoi da tapi, trovai la moglie den Guari e den Bernard. Saluteron mi simplement per sein clownar. Launa dicen.
All right, so in those examples, you can already hear a little bit of the ideas of like repeated material coming up. And we'd have to take a much larger listen to, map the form out and everything.
Yeah.
But there's a little sampling.
I liked both of them.
For you. I know. They, as a close friend of ours, Manny Green, would say, they're bangers. I quite enjoyed them. Serious. Back to the serious research here.
I better leave then.
So next, moving from this song poetry focus, I also researched a little bit about some of the professional singers and musicians in Al-Andalus. So we're gonna go back in time. Do you want to make it? There you go.
We need like the wind chimes and the harp, or is that only for dream sequences? We're going back in time, so I don't. Is that wind?
I think Moriah mouth noises is the best. Oh no, not that. Anyway, So back in time into the Cordoban court in the 800s, so this is relatively recently after the Umayyad Caliphate came into the Iberian Peninsula. And I read about this Muslim ruler in the court at Cordoba. He hosted some Christian emissaries from the north because that's where they were pushed out to. So he hosted some of them from the north and studied their singing. And then later he was gifted an Iraqi slave singer. And then, and I quote, he set out to combine Iraqi singing with that which he had learned from the Christians, which they later performed together in like important gatherings. So the Iraqi music, I mean, that's not North Africa. I know you're geographically not North Africa, but it was part of the larger Muslim dynasty. Yes. So there are definitely some similarities there, and this is like evidence of a person in power at that time actively deciding that he was going to combine the musics. Mm-hmm. And there's evidence later of more blending of the musical traditions in the 13th century. So this is after the Reconquista and the Christian northern kingdoms had taken over. And those rulers also, there's evidence that they tried to combine the musical traditions as well. Yeah. And even beyond that, I found this interesting statistic. So in 1284, among the 27 musicians in the household of this really important Christian king in the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula, there were, out of the 27, 13 of them were Arab musicians. So presumably, half. Right, more than half. More than half.
I'm also math challenged.
So, one of them was also Jewish. So that there's where the more than half comes from. We're Andalusis, and presumably were paid to perform their music. Mm-hmm. So this Christian ruler, even after reconquering this land, was still actively trying to retain some of those musical practices and have them performed, in court performances. And the court performances are where people of power heard the music and could disseminate it further and things like that. And there are tons of records of Andalusi performers in other 13th and 14th century Christian courts. So this didn't go away. Yeah. This influence. Which is something we don't normally think about, of like how rulers would bring in other people to perform. We hear in our class about, the most popular, their favorite composers of the same nation, but we don't hear too much about this.
King Louis was like, y'all are gonna play for me every day. That's your job now.
Right.
But beyond that.
But some of those people were from other cultures, and then that, encouraged the blending of those musics. And then this is one of my favorite pieces of evidence. So we're going to talk about the history of the bowed lute. Ooh. So the lute, how would you describe the lute?
The lute is like, it's not a guitar. It's like a precursor, distant cousin, plucked string.
Right.
That was used as accompaniment often.
Yeah. That's a pretty good
it looks like an egg
illustration.
with a neck.
That's even better. So essentially, the lute, was often plucked, but then began to be bowed at some point in history. And so the history of the bowed lute, it emerged into Western Europe about the same time as the Muslim conquest of Iberia. Oh. Coincidence?
I think not.
You stole my punchline. So there's actually little doubt among historians that they introduced the instrument to the Iberian Peninsula, but it was new to them as well. Yeah. So this had come from like other traditions further east. So it wasn't necessarily some original influence of these people on the classical tradition, but it wasn't played then like it is today. So if you think you got your egg with the neck, is that what you said? So the egg, is sitting on the ground like between your legs. It's right. The body of the instrument it sat more like a cello, where it was played. The instrument was vertical and the bow was drawn horizontally across the strings, until the Middle Ages ish.
Okay.
There's some debate about when this change happened, and obviously it wasn't like everyone just woke up one morning and decided they were going to play the instrument a different way.
Some dude probably was like, I'm gonna try playing it this way, and then everyone was like, huh?
Right, and then some people liked it, some people didn't, whatever. So the most common historical narrative is that the Muslims of the Umayyad Caliphate introduced the bowed lute to the Christians, which, I mean, that's taken for granted. But then it's thought that the Christians took it and decided to pick up the lute, put it on their shoulder, and play it horizontally more like a violin today.
Oh.
And regardless of where this came from, there's no doubt that that was like the earliest ancestor to the modern day, like violin and viola.
Okay.
That's where this idea of playing a bowed string instrument, like horizontally, came from. Most historians have talked about the fact that the Christians in the north changed how it was played, how they had this innovation, and that's what impacted the course of this musical practice.
Sure.
But wait, there is a critical piece of evidence that I found that changes everything. So
Oh boy.
there's
Hang
this.
on to your hats, folks.
I know. There's this decoration atop a column in Muslim Córdoba, which is dated back to the 10th century, which is earlier than any record of Christians playing the lute from the shoulder. And although the image has been defaced and, it's very old, enough remains that you can tell that it's a musician playing a 3-string fiddle horizontally across the chest while bowing vertically. So here's evidence from the Muslim-occupied area of Al-Andalus that proves that this practice came about earlier than it came about in the Christian communities. So I'm going to show you. I will also put a link to this image in the description, but I am able to show Moriah right here.
Oh.
Can you, right? Because then you have the lute and it's across
smaller
the
than
chest.
I expected, but it looks more like a violin than a
Right.
lute. Yeah.
Right. But that's showing, I mean, it's pretty clear that the poor guy doesn't have a face anymore.
Yeah, which is unfortunate, but I can tell that he has hands and he's using it to play this instrument.
Right, and it's a bowed instrument held horizontally. And this was created earlier than we have any evidence of Christians using this practice.
Interesting.
Meaning it had already been developed before being adopted by the Christians, which disproves this generally accepted historical narrative.
Interesting. Do more people know about that piece of art, or is that like a more recently discovered thing?
The author that I was reading about says that most people just kind of disregard this piece of evidence. And, that comes back to the whole concept of history as a myth is even historians not only, I mean, they get to decide what pieces of evidence they use. Oftentimes they have this argument, and it's easy to acknowledge certain pieces of evidence and disregard others in search of upholding what you already hold to be true.
Instead of just being like, hello, here's all of the facts for you to learn.
So this is often disregarded, whereas it actually disproves everything.
Well.
So that's my last tangent for this time around. The last bit of evidence we'll be discussing that supports the claim that Al-Andalus definitely did leave a lasting impact on the Western European musical tradition.
Yeah.
I hope you join us for our final episode where we'll review, all of the knowledge we've gained and talk about why it's even important to you as a listener, whether you're a musicologist, a musician, or just someone who loves music of any kind. And we'll talk about how what we've learned from this narrative and this analysis of myth versus fact from history can apply to other, musical histories and just histories in general, and how you can reframe how you see the facts around you and take a more in-depth analysis of what is myth and what is fact.
I'm excited. I hope y'all are excited too.
It's gonna be good. One more mouth trumpet exit.
Wait, I don't get to do it next time? Only one more?
Next time I'll have you bring your actual trumpet.
That's a no from me. Goodbye.